Steel River's first time I met Dr. Eli Rosen. I was rappelling onto the Fort Pitt Bridge during a flash flood to assess structural damage. And he was standing in knee-deep toxic runoff collecting water samples because he refused to leave before documenting the chemical spill. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The Monongahela was rising 6 inches an hour. The National Weather Service had issued evacuation orders for the entire river corridor. And there was a guy in waders and a university windbreaker calmly filling sample bottles while chemical foam from the upstream spill created rainbow slicks around his legs. "Sir," I shouted down from my harness, 20 feet above the bridge deck. "This bridge is under structural stress evaluation. You need to evacuate now." He looked up at me, curly auburn hair plastered to his head by rain, green eyes sharp even through the downpour, and said, "I need 10 more minutes. You need to leave in 10 seconds. The dilution rate for this spill is accelerating. If I don't get baseline samples now, we lose the entire dataset." He went back to his bottles, completely ignoring me. I finished my rappel, boots hitting the deck with a splash. Water was over the walkway now, flowing fast enough to pull at my legs. My radio crackled. "Pendant dispatch. Urgent. Chen, structural sensors are showing stress fractures in the south span. We need your assessment in 5 minutes. Copy that." I waited toward the guy with the death wish. "Hey, Dr. Stubborn. You have 5 minutes before this bridge might collapse, and you're standing on the section that'll go first." That got his attention. He looked up again, and I saw him actually process what I'd said, not just the words, but the implications. His hand stilled on the sample bottle. "South span," he asked. "Where exactly?" "Pier 7 support column. We're standing about 30 feet from it." I pointed to where the bridge met the water. "Stress fractures mean the concrete's failing. When it goes, this whole section drops into the river. With you on it." He looked at his bottles, looked at me, looked at the bridge under our feet. "I have 4 samples left to collect," he said quietly. "The Lawrenceville chemical plant spilled God knows what into this river 2 hours ago. If I don't document the contamination levels now before the flood dilutes everything, we'll never know what they dumped. Never be able to hold them accountable. People drink from this river system. People also die on bridges that collapse. Then help me work faster." He held out an empty bottle. "You take samples from the east side. I'll take west. We can be done in 3 minutes." I should have grabbed him and dragged him off the bridge. That's what my training said. That's what Pendant protocol demanded. But something in his face, the desperation mixed with absolute certainty that his work mattered, made me take the bottle. 3 minutes, I said. "Then we run." His smile was like light breaking through the storm. "Thank you. I'm Eli, by the way. Dr. Eli Rosen, Pitt Environmental Toxicology. Marcus Chen, Pendant Bridge Inspection Unit. And when we die because I helped you collect toxic samples instead of evacuating, I'm haunting you first." Fair. He was already moving. Fast and efficient, labeling bottles with a waterproof marker. "East rail. Grab samples every 10 feet. Fill to the line cap tight. Hand them to me." We worked in the rain. Me in my hard hat and safety harness. Him in his waders and university windbreaker. Both of us racing against a bridge that was literally cracking beneath us. And the crazy thing, he was good at this. Fast, precise, no wasted movement. Every sample labeled with coordinates and timestamps, organized into his waterproof case like he was working in a lab instead of a flood zone. "Last one." He capped a bottle, locked his case. "Okay, we can." The bridge shuddered. Not a little vibration. A full body shake that ran through the steel and concrete like an earthquake. My radio exploded with static and voices. "South span showing critical failure. All personnel evacuate immediately. Repeat. Evacuate." Pila grabbed my arm. "Marcus, run, now." We ran. Through ankle-deep water, past abandoned cars, toward the north side where the bridge connected to solid ground. Behind us I heard the sound, metal grinding, concrete cracking, the specific shriek of a structure failing. "Don't look back," I yelled. "Just run." We were 50 feet from safety when the south span dropped. I felt it through my boots, the bridge deck tilting, the walkway buckling. Eli stumbled, and I grabbed him, my harness safety line still clipped to the bridge rail, doing exactly nothing because the rail was falling into the river. "Hold on." I unclipped from the failing section, ray-clipped to the north span railing that was still stable, wrapped my other arm around Eli. "I've got you." The world tilted 30 degrees. Water rushed over the deck, now flowing like a waterfall toward the collapsed section. Ellie's sample case was torn from his grip, disappeared into the brown water. He made a sound like losing it physically hurt, but we held on. Me clipped to stable structure, him holding onto me. Both of us pressed against the railing while the south span of the Fort Pitt Bridge collapsed into the Monongahela River behind us. When the noise stopped, we were alive. Soaked, shaking, but alive. Are you hurt? I checked him over. No blood. No obvious injuries. No. You. His voice was shaky but steady. Fine. We need to move before more of this bridge decides to fall. I kept him close, moved us carefully toward the north end. My radio was screaming dispatch rescue. Everyone trying to confirm casualties. Chen here. I reported. To people on the north span, ambulatory. No injuries. South span is down. Requesting immediate extraction. Copy that. Chen. Stay put. Rescue team inbound. We made it to the stable section near the Duquesne side. Sat down on the wet concrete with our backs against the railing, both of us breathing hard. I lost 5 years of data. Eli said quietly. That case had everything. My baseline samples, my equipment, my field notes. 5 years of documenting pollution in the Three Rivers. Gone. I looked at him soaked, shaking, auburn hair in his eyes. Green eyes devastated, and instead of being angry that we'd almost died for his samples, I felt something else entirely. You're alive, I said. That's what matters, is it? He wiped rain from his face. People are drinking contaminated water. The chemical plant will deny everything. Without my data, without you, there's no one to collect new data. I shifted closer. You can rebuild, but you can't do that if you're dead. He looked at me for a long moment. You stayed. You helped me collect those samples even though you knew the bridge was failing. Why? Because you believed it mattered. And maybe I'm an idiot. But yeah, I believed you. You're not an idiot. His smile was small but real. You're Marcus Chen, Pendant Bridge Inspection Unit. And you might have just saved my life. You saved mine first. If you hadn't insisted on working fast, we'd have been on the south span when it dropped. So we're even. Sure. Let's call it even. The rescue helicopter arrived 10 minutes later. They lifted us off the bridge in a harness, flew us to the emergency staging area on the north shore. We were separated immediately, me to debrief with Pendant, him to the paramedics for evaluation. But before they pulled him away, Eli grabbed my hand. Thank you, he said, for not dragging me off that bridge, for trusting that the work mattered. It did matter. It does. I squeezed his hand. Go get checked out. And Eli, next time there's a chemical spill, call Pendant first. We'll clear the bridge before you go collecting toxic samples. His laugh was surprised and genuine. Deal. I watched him walk away, still in his soaked field gear, still carrying himself like he'd lost something irreplaceable, and realized I wanted to see him again. Not on a failing bridge in a flood. Just again. 3 days later I showed up at the University of Pittsburgh Environmental Sciences building. I had a meeting with the county engineer about bridge reconstruction, but I arrived an hour early and used the time to find the toxicology department. Eli was in a lab on the 3rd floor, surrounded by equipment and looking significantly less like he'd nearly died. He wore dark-rimmed glasses now, a pit hoodie, jeans. His curly auburn hair was tied back in a small bun. He was pipetting something into test tubes with absolute focus. I knocked on the doorframe. Dr. Rosen. He looked up, and recognition flashed across his face. Marcus. What are you? He set down the pipette, pulled off his gloves. Is this about the bridge collapse? Are you filing a report? No. I mean, yes, there's a report. But that's not why I'm here. I suddenly felt awkward in my Pendant polo and work boots, standing in an academic lab. I wanted to check if you were okay. After everything. His expression softened. I'm fine. Physically. Anyway. Professionally, I'm rebuilding 5 years of work from backup files and hoping my dissertation committee doesn't revoke my candidacy. He gestured to the lab. Hence the frantic catching up. They can't revoke it because you lost samples in a bridge collapse. You'd be surprised what academia considers reasonable grounds. But he was smiling now. Want coffee? There's a place on campus that doesn't completely destroy the beans. I have a meeting in 40 minutes. Then we'll walk fast. The coffee shop was one of those aggressively Pittsburgh Places Andy Warhol prints on the walls, sandwiches named after neighborhoods. Staff who called everyone yins. We got oversized mugs and sat by the window overlooking the Cathedral of Learning. Tell me something true, Eli said, echoing something I'd heard in movies but never expected in real life. Like what? Like why you inspect bridges for a living when you could probably design them. You went to Carnegie Mellon, right? I saw your hard hat. CMU engineering sticker. Good eye. I was impressed and a little unnerved that he'd noticed. Yeah, I studied structural engineering. Graduated 2 years ago. Could have gone into design, but I paused, trying to articulate something I never really explained to anyone. Designing bridges is about creating something new. Inspecting them is about keeping people safe. And I grew up in this city watching infrastructure fail because no one wanted to pay for maintenance. The steel mills closed, the money dried up, and suddenly bridges were falling down. The I-35 bridge in Minnesota collapsed when I was in high school. Killed 13 people. That could have been Pittsburgh. That could have been my family driving across the Fort Pitt Bridge to get to our restaurant. Your family has a restaurant. Dim Sum Place in Squirrel Hill. My parents opened it 30 years ago. Best xiaolongbao in the city. I took a drink of coffee. So yeah, I inspect bridges. Because someone has to make sure they don't fall down and kill people. Eli was quiet for a moment, looking at me with something I couldn't quite read. That's incredibly beautiful, actually. You're keeping the city safe, says the guy who collects toxic samples during flash floods. That's different. How? Because I'm documenting environmental crimes. You're preventing structural disasters. Your work is proactive. Mine is reactive. He pushed his glasses up. Although I guess we're both trying to keep people safe. Just different methods. Competence romance, I said without thinking. What? Nothing. Something my coworker said once. I was absolutely not explaining that Marco from the inspection unit had called my dating life tragic and suggested I find someone who got the work. Your turn. Why toxicology? Why rivers? Ali's expression shifted, became more serious. I grew up in Fox Chapel. Rich suburb, clean water, no pollution. Then I did my undergrad at Pitt and started actually paying attention to the rivers. The Allegheny, the Monongahela, the Ohio. They're cleaner than they were in the 70s, but they're not clean. Industrial legacy pollution, agricultural runoff, pharmaceutical contamination from wastewater. And nobody talks about it because Pittsburgh's proud of its post-industrial renaissance. We want to believe the rivers are fine now, but they're not. But they're not. He wrapped his hands around his mug. So I study them. I document the contamination. I build data sets that can be used to hold polluters accountable. Because someone has to pay attention. Someone has to care. We looked at each other across the table. And I felt that same click I'd felt on the bridge. Recognition, understanding, to people who'd structured their entire lives around giving a damn about things other people ignored. We're the same. I said. Yeah, he was smiling now. We are. Even if you do work for the government and I'm a broke PhD student. Hey, Pendant pays pretty well, actually. Then you can buy the next coffee. There's going to be a next coffee. I hope so. Ali's eyes were very green behind his glasses. Unless you only visit people you save from collapsing bridges as a one-time courtesy. No, I checked my watch. I have that meeting in 15 minutes. But Eli, can I see you again? When we're not both covered in river water and running for our lives. Yes. Absolutely yes. He pulled out his phone. Give me your number. I'll text you. We exchanged numbers. I stood up to leave, then hesitated. What you do matters, I said. The river sampling, the documentation, all of it. Don't let your committee make you think otherwise. His smile could have powered the city. Thank you, Marcus. And what you do matters too. You keep people safe. That's everything. I left the coffee shop feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Hope, maybe, or possibility. The sense that I'd met someone who understood why the work had to come first because they felt the exact same way. My phone buzzed before I reached my truck. Eli. This is Eli, the guy who almost got you killed on a bridge. Want to get dinner sometime when neither of us is drowning? I typed back immediately, yes. When? Eli, Friday. There's a polished place in the Strip District. Pierogies that'll change your life. Marcus, I'm Chinese American. My standards for life-changing dumplings are very high. Eli, challenge accepted. 7 p.m. Marcus, it's a date. Eli, it really is. Friday arrived with the kind of October weather that makes Pittsburgh perfect. Crisp air, leaves turning gold and red, the rivers reflecting a blue sky for once instead of gray. I met Eli outside the restaurant in Lawrenceville, and he looked different out of field gear. Dark jeans, green button-down that matched his eyes, hair looser on his shoulders. Still those dark rimmed glasses. Still that smile that made my chest tight. You cleaned up nice, I said. You do. Although I kind of missed the hard hat, he was definitely checking me out. I'd worn dark slacks and a fitted gray sweater, wanting to look like I'd tried without trying too hard. Shall we? The restaurant was exactly the kind of place I love. Family-owned, worn booths, menu in Polish and English, the smell of fried onions and sour cream. We ordered too much food and talked for 3 hours. I learned that Eli was the youngest of 3 kids. That his parents were both academics. Father taught history at Pitt. Mother was a retired high school English teacher. That he'd come out in college and his family had been awkwardly supportive in that liberal Jewish parent way where they wanted him to know they were okay with it but didn't quite know how to talk about it. My mom keeps asking if I'm seeing anyone special. Eli said, making air quotes, which is her code for "Are you dating then?" because we're totally fine with that, but also we'd like grandchildren someday. Are you seeing anyone special? Not until recently. His foot brushed mine under the table. You came out to my family 2 years ago. My parents own the restaurant, remember? My mom cried and said she loved me. My dad asked if I was still going to take over the business someday. Very pragmatic reaction. I paused. And no, not seeing anyone. Work makes dating complicated. Because you work weird hours inspecting bridges. Because I care more about structural integrity than most people care about anything. Turns out that's not super sexy on dating apps. I was being more honest than I'd planned. Most guys want someone who's available, who can text back immediately, who doesn't cancel dates because a bridge needs emergency inspection. I'm not that guy. Good. Allie's eyes were intense now. Because I'm the guy who works 16-hour days in a lab, who cancels plans when there's a water quality emergency, who thinks about pollution patterns at 2 in the morning. I don't want someone who needs me to be available all the time. I want someone who understands why the work matters, even when the work almost gets you killed. Especially then. He reached across the table, took my hand. Marcus, I haven't stopped thinking about you since that bridge. Not just because you saved my life, though that helps, but because you understood. You didn't think I was crazy for wanting those samples. You helped me collect them even though it was dangerous. You weren't crazy. You were dedicated. There's a difference. Most people don't see that difference. I'm not most people. I know. His thumb traced circles on my palm. That's why I'm sitting here hoping you'll let me kiss you at the end of this date instead of being professional and appropriate. My heart did something complicated. What makes you think I want professional and appropriate? The fact that you're a government engineer who probably has a 15-point inspection checklist for relationships. It's actually a 20-point checklist. And you're passing. I squeezed his hand. For the record, you can kiss me now if you want. Or at the end of the date. Or both. Eli laughed, surprised and delighted, and leaned across the table. The kiss was brief. Tasted like pierogies and possibility. And when he pulled back, his cheeks were flushed. Both, he decided. Definitely both. We stayed until the restaurant closed. Walked through Lawrenceville in the October cold, past the art galleries and boutiques and gentrified row houses that used to be steelworker homes. I drove him back to his car at the university, and we sat in my truck in the parking lot like teenagers. I had a really good time tonight, Eli said. Me too. I was very aware of how close we were sitting. How his knee was touching mine. How his hair caught the street light. Can I see you again? Yes. When? Tomorrow. Too eager. I didn't care. I'm off tomorrow. We could, I don't know, do something that doesn't involve collapsing bridges or toxic samples. How about the Phipps Conservatory? I haven't been in years, and it's supposed to be beautiful in fall. Sounds perfect. He kissed me again before getting out of the truck. Longer this time, his hand on my jaw, my hand finding his waist. When we broke apart, we were both breathing hard. Good night, Marcus. Good night, Eli. I watched him drive away, a beat-up Honda Civic with a Save the Rivers bumper. sticker and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Happy, hopeful, like maybe I'd found someone who wouldn't ask me to choose between love and work, because he was living the same impossible balance. The next 6 weeks were stolen moments between our schedules. Morning coffee before his lab work and my bridge inspections. Late night dinners when we both finally finished work. Weekends at the Phipps Conservatory, the Carnegie Museums, hiking in Frick Park while Eli explained forest ecology and I pointed out pedestrian bridge structural details. We met each other's worlds. I brought him to a pendant training where my crew immediately started the interrogation. Marco took me aside afterward. "Your boyfriend's cute," Marco said, making me turn red. Boyfriend. I hadn't used the word yet. Hadn't known if Eli wanted to. "Isn't he? You've been dating for like 6 weeks, Chen. Make it official before some other engineer snatches him up." That night over dinner I asked, do you want it? I was terrible at this. "Marco called you my boyfriend today and I didn't correct him." Ali's smile was blinding. "Good. Because I've been telling my lab mates about my boyfriend for 3 weeks. Yeah. He reached across the table. "You're my boyfriend, Marcus Chen, and I'm yours. If that works for you, that works for me." We were happy. Genuinely. And complicatedly happy in a way I hadn't expected. Eli understood when I had to cancel dates for emergency inspections. I understood when he worked 16-hour days because his research had a deadline. We both got that the work wasn't optional, it was who we were. But Pittsburgh weather doesn't care about relationships. In mid-November, the National Weather Service issued a flood warning that made the Fort Pitt Bridge collapse look minor. A major storm system was coming, heavy rain, rapid snowmelt from early snow in the mountains, potential for historic flooding in the Three Rivers system. The city activated emergency protocols. PennDOT called in all bridge inspection teams. And the University of Pittsburgh Environmental Sciences Department mobilized for emergency water quality monitoring. I texted Eli the night before the storm hit. "Going to be working around the clock for the next 48 hours. Stay safe." His response came immediately. "You too. I love you." I stared at my phone. We'd been dating 6 weeks. That was fast. That was maybe too fast. But looking at those 3 words, I realized they were true. I did love him. Loved his dedication, his passion, the way he saw the world in data points and possibilities. Loved how he understood why I had to work impossible hours because he did the same thing. "I love you too," I sent back. "Now promise me you won't collect samples on any collapsing bridges." "I promise." "You promise you won't rappel onto any structurally compromised spans. Deal. See you after the storm. Boyfriend. Count on it. Asterisk. The storm hit at midnight. By 03:00 the rivers were rising at rates that broke records. The Allegheny was up 12 feet. The Monongahela was cresting. The point where all 3 rivers meet was completely flooded. And PennDOT was activating emergency bridge protocols for every span over water. I was assigned to the 10th Street Bridge, an aging steel structure that crossed the Allegheny. My job: monitor structural integrity during the flood, close the bridge if sensors detected dangerous stress levels. At 06:00 my radio crackled. "Chen, we have a situation. Environmental Sciences team is reporting chemical contamination in the Allegheny near the 10th Street Bridge. They're requesting access for emergency sampling." My stomach dropped. "Who's on the team?" I'd static. Dr. Rosen and 2 grad students. Of course it was. "Tell them negative," I said. "Bridge is under stress monitoring. No civilian access." "Copy that." 10 minutes later my phone rang. "Eli. Marcus, we need access to the 10th Street Bridge. There's a major chemical contamination event." "No. Absolutely not. That bridge is under stress evaluation. And the river's rising. You're not going out there. People are going to drink this water." His voice was tight with frustration. "We need baseline samples before the contamination dilutes. If we don't document this, then you document it from the shore." "Eli, I'm not letting you onto a bridge during a flood. Not after what happened at Fort Pitt. That was different. It really wasn't." I was gripping my radio so hard my knuckles were white. "Please, I'm begging you. Find another way to collect your samples." Silence on the line. Then, Okay. You're right. We'll find another access point." His voice softened. "I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking about what it's like for you, watching me take risks, I love you, I said, even though I was technically on duty and my supervisor was 10 feet away. That means I need you to stay safe. I love you too. That means I need you to stay safe. Marcus. The 10th Street Bridge sensors, what are they reading? I checked my monitor. Elevated stress on the center supports. Nothing critical yet, but we're watching it. Then get off that bridge if it gets worse. Don't be a hero. Same to you. No heroic sample collecting. Deal. See you when the rivers go down. Count on it. By noon the Allegheny was at flood stage. The 10th Street Bridge sensors were screaming warnings, critical stress levels on multiple supports, concrete showing fracture patterns. The entire structure groaning under the force of the floodwater. Pendant made the call, close the bridge, evacuate all personnel. I was packing up my equipment when my supervisor radioed to Chen. We have a problem. Someone's on the downstream side of the bridge. Young guy, waiters. Looks like he's collecting samples from the water. No. I grabbed binoculars, looked downstream. Auburn curly hair. University windbreaker. Sample case. Eli. That's my boyfriend, I told my supervisor. I'm going to get him. Chen, we're evacuating, then evacuate. I'll be right behind you. I was already moving, climbing over the barriers, running toward the downstream side. The water was waist deep now, flowing fast enough to pull at my legs. I could see Eli 30 feet away, collecting samples from the contaminated water like the bridge above him wasn't about to collapse. Eli. I shouted over the roar of the flood. He looked up, and guilt flashed across his face. Marcus, I can explain. You said you'd find another access point. This was the other access point. We can't reach the contamination from shore. And if we don't sample now, he stopped, seeing something in my face. You're really angry. I'm terrified. I reached him, grabbed his arm. That bridge is going to fail, Eli. The sensors are critical. We need to leave right now. I'm almost done. The bridge groaned. A sound like metal tearing, concrete cracking. I'd heard it before, at Fort Pitt. I knew what came next. Move. I wrapped my arms around Eli, hauled him toward shore. Behind us the 10th Street Bridge made the sound of a structure dying. We ran through the flood water. Him clutching his sample case, me dragging him by the arm, both of us fighting current that tried to sweep us into the Allegheny. The bridge shrieked, and I risked a look back. The center span was dropping, supports failing in sequence. Don't look, Eli yelled. Just run. We hit the shoreline as the center span collapsed. The sound was immense, steel and concrete crashing into the flooded river, sending waves that caught us from behind and knocked us both off our feet. I held onto Eli, felt him hold onto me, and we tumbled together into the shallow water at the river's edge. When the world stopped moving, we were lying in mud and flood debris, soaked and shaking but alive. Are you hurt? I checked him over frantically. No. You. Fine. But Eli. I sat up, looked at him. You promised. You said you'd find another way. I did find another way. It just happened to be near a bridge. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I'm sorry. I knew you'd try to stop me if I told you. Because it was dangerous. Because bridges are collapsing and rivers are flooding and you could have died. I was yelling now, all the fear converting to anger. Do you have any idea what it's like watching you take these risks? Knowing that your work matters but also knowing that I can't lose you. Yes, he sat up too, eyes blazing. Yes, I know exactly what it's like. Because I'm watching you rappel onto failing bridges during floods. I'm listening to you talk about stress fractures and structural failure like it's normal. You think I'm not terrified every time you go to work. We stared at each other, both breathing hard. I love you, I said finally. That means I need you to stay alive. I love you too. That means I need you to stay alive. He grabbed my hand. Marcus, I can't stop doing my work. And you can't stop doing yours. We both knew that when we started this. I know. But I need you to at least tell me when you're taking risks. Not lie to me and say you'll find another way when you're planning to wade into contaminated flood water under a failing bridge. His expression crumbled. You're right. I'm sorry. I was so focused on getting the samples that I didn't think about what it would do to you if something happened to me. Or what it would do to me if I had to watch. I pulled him into a hug. Felt him wrap his arms around me. We're both idiots. Dedicated, passionate idiots who care more about our work than our own safety. Yeah? He was shaking now, Adrenaline crash. But we survived. Again. We did. But Eli, next time there's a chemical spill during a flood, you call me first. We figure out a safe way to collect samples together. Deal. Deal. He pulled back, looked at me with those green eyes. I really do love you, you know. Even when you're yelling at me about bridge collapses. I really do love you too. Even when you're lying to me about not collecting toxic samples. I kissed him there in the mud, both of us soaked and covered in flood debris. Now let's get somewhere dry before we both get hypothermia. We walked back to where Pendant had set up the emergency command center. My supervisor took one look at us and sighed. Chen, your boyfriend's a menace. I know. But he got his samples. Eli held up his case, triumphant despite being covered in mud. Documented the entire contamination event. The EPA is going to be very interested in Lawrenceville Chemicals' illegal discharge, worth almost dying for. My supervisor asked. Yes, Eli and I said simultaneously. My supervisor shook his head. You two deserve each other. Now go get checked out by the medics. Asterisk epilogue 6 months later. Spring in Pittsburgh is a specific kind of magic. The rivers return to normal levels, the bridges reopen, and the city shakes off winter like it never happened. Eli finished his dissertation using the flood contamination data. It turned into a major EPA investigation that resulted in millions in fines for polluters. Pendant promoted me to senior bridge inspector with a focus on climate resilience. We moved in together in March. A row house in Bloomfield with a view of the Allegheny. Close enough to Pitt for Ellie's postdoc work, and close enough to the Strip District for me to get pierogies whenever I wanted. I forgot what it's like to come home and have you already here. Eli said one evening, stretched out on our couch with his laptop and a stack of research papers. You mean you forgot what it's like to come home and have me complaining about bridge maintenance funding? Cuts. I was at the kitchen table, reviewing structural reports. That too. He closed his laptop, came to sit next to me. Marcus, can I ask you something? Always. Are you happy with this with us? He gestured vaguely at our house, our life. I know we both work insane hours. I know we're not a normal couple. But are you happy? I looked at him, curly auburn hair loose around his shoulders, glasses slipping down his nose, wearing one of my CMU engineering hoodies because all his clothes were in the wash. This brilliant, stubborn, passionate person who understood why I had to inspect bridges at 3 a.m. and never asked me to choose between love and work. Yeah, I said. I'm happy. Even when you collect samples during floods, even when you rappel onto structurally compromised bridges, we're still idiots. Yeah, but we're idiots together. He kissed me, soft and sure. That's not bad. That's not bad at all. 6 months later, when the first big storm of the new season rolled in, we were ready. Me with my bridge inspection equipment, him with his sampling gear, both of us knowing that the work mattered, but we mattered more. I cleared emergency routes, he documented contamination, and when the storm passed we came home to each other. During the ceremony, Eli promised to stop collecting samples on collapsing bridges. I promised to stop rappelling onto structurally compromised spans without backup. We both knew we were lying, but we meant it in the way that mattered. We'd try. We'd be careful. We'd come home to each other. Marco gave a speech about how he'd known we'd end up together the moment he heard I'd helped some crazy scientist collect toxic samples during a bridge collapse. Ellie's lab partner gave a speech about how Eli had talked about the hot bridge inspector for 3 weeks before finally asking me to. Coffee. We danced under string lights while the 3 rivers flowed below us. And when Eli pulled me close and whispered, I love you, bridge guy, I whispered back, I love you too, river guy, and meant it with everything I had. 2 years later, when Pittsburgh got its next historic flood, we worked it together. Me coordinating bridge safety protocols from the emergency command center, him running the water quality response team from the university. We texted throughout the crisis. Eli, all bridges holding. Marcus, so far. How's the contamination? Eli, bad but documented. Coming home tonight. Marcus, if the rivers cooperate. You. Eli, same. Love you. Marcus, love you too. Stay safe. Eli, you first. We came home at 2 a.m. to our Bloomfield row house, exhausted and muddy and alive. Fell into bed still wearing our work clothes, too tired to shower. And I thought, this is it. This is the life we built. To people who care about impossible things, who work insane hours, who understand that sometimes the work has to come first except when it does in single quotes t dot, and when I woke up the next morning with Eli curled against my chest, sunlight coming through our window and the city safe outside, I knew we'd made the right choice. We'd met on a collapsing bridge in a flood. We'd built a life that survived every storm after. And we'd keep showing up for the work, for the city, for each other. That's not a bad story. That's not bad at all.